Marcus Chen adjusted his worn backpack as he entered the weapons engineering classroom at Galactic Defense Academy. The sterile white walls hummed with energy shields, and holographic displays showed various alien weapon designs rotating slowly in the air. He was the only human in a class of 23 students, surrounded by beings whose civilizations had been crafting weapons for millennia. The instructor, Commander Vex Tai, stood at the front of the room. His chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the artificial lights, and his forearms moved with practiced precision as he manipulated the holographic controls. The Catharan had been a weapon master for over 2 centuries, and his reputation for demanding excellence was known throughout the academy. "Today we will conduct practical demonstrations," Vex Tai announced, his voice carrying the clicking undertones typical of his species. "Each of you will showcase a traditional weapon from your homeworld and explain its tactical applications in modern combat scenarios." Marcus felt his stomach drop. Around him, his classmates began exchanging excited glances. The Zephyrians whispered about their crystalline blade technology. The Mordak students discussed their plasma-forged warhammers. The lone ethereal in the class simply smiled, knowing her people's phase weapons would impress everyone. But Marcus had nothing. Humans were the newest species to join the Galactic Federation, and they were known more for their adaptability and stubbornness than for advanced weaponry. While other civilizations had been perfecting energy weapons and exotic matter manipulation for thousands of years, humans had only recently developed faster-than-light travel. "We will begin with the Zephyrians," Vex Tai continued, gesturing toward the crystalline beings near the front. "Lyra-san, please demonstrate your people's blade work." Lyra-san gracefully moved to the demonstration area. Her translucent blue form shimmered as she reached into what appeared to be empty air. Suddenly, a blade of pure crystal materialized in her hand, humming with internal energy. The weapon seemed to sing as she moved through a complex series of forms, the blade extending and contracting at her will. "The Zephyrian crystal blade," she explained in her melodic voice, "draws energy from the wielder's life force and can cut through any known material. The length and sharpness are limited only by the user's mental focus and physical endurance." The class murmured appreciatively as Lyra-san demonstrated how the blade could slice through a block of reinforced titanium like it was paper. Even Commander Vex Tai nodded approval, making notes on his datapad. Next came Gorath, one of the Mordak students. The massive, stone-skinned humanoid hefted a weapon that looked like it belonged in a museum of ancient warfare. The warhammer was as long as Marcus was tall, but when Gorath activated it, the head began to glow with intense heat. "The forge hammer of my people," Gorath rumbled, his voice like grinding boulders. "Powered by contained plasma, it can generate temperatures exceeding those found in stellar cores. One strike can melt through starship armor." He brought the hammer down on a test block, and the entire target simply vaporized in a cloud of superheated gas. The protective barriers around the demonstration area flickered as they absorbed the excess energy. Student after student showcased increasingly impressive weapons. There were sonic disruptors that could shatter molecular bonds, gravity weapons that could crush matter into singularities, and energy rifles that fired contained antimatter. Each demonstration was more spectacular than the last, and with each one, Marcus felt smaller and more out of place. When it was the ethereal's turn, Silandra simply raised her hand. Reality seemed to bend around her fingers as she opened what appeared to be a hole in space itself. Through the portal, Marcus could see another part of the Academy's training ground, nearly a kilometer away. "Phase manipulation allows us to strike enemies regardless of distance or obstacles," she explained calmly. "Physical barriers become meaningless when you can fold space itself." The demonstration target on the far side of campus suddenly sprouted a perfect circular hole, cut so cleanly that the edges looked polished. Silandra closed the portal with a gentle gesture, as if she had merely opened and closed the door. Commander Vexthai's approval was evident in the rapid clicking of his mandibles. "Excellent work, Silandra. The tactical applications are obvious." As the demonstrations continued, Marcus began to panic. What could he possibly show these beings? Humans still used chemical propellant weapons in many situations. Their most advanced infantry weapons were plasma rifles that were considered obsolete by galactic standards. Even their melee weapons were just refined versions of ancient steel blades. "Chen, Marcus," Vexthai called out, consulting his roster. "You're next." The classroom fell silent. Marcus could feel every eye in the room focused on him as he slowly stood up. His hands were sweating, and he could hear his heart pounding in his ears. He walked to the demonstration area on unsteady legs, acutely aware that he had absolutely nothing to show. Marcus began, then stopped. His voice cracked slightly, and he cleared his throat. "I don't have a traditional weapon with me, Commander." A few snickers came from the back of the room. The Mordak students exchanged amused glances, and even Lyra-san seemed puzzled by this admission. Commander Vexthai's 4 arms crossed in front of his chest. "Explain yourself, Cadet Chen. Are you telling me that humans have no warrior traditions? No weapons worthy of demonstration?" "We do have weapons, sir," Marcus said, feeling his face flush with embarrassment. "But they're primitive by galactic standards. Projectile weapons, bladed implements, chemical explosives. Nothing like what you've seen here today." "Primitive," Vexthai repeated, his mandibles clicking in what Marcus had learned was amusement. "How disappointingly predictable. Very well, since you came unprepared, you will need to improvise." The instructor gestured around the classroom with 2 of his arms. "You have access to everything in this room. Standard furniture, basic materials, emergency supplies. You have exactly 1 hour to create and demonstrate a functional weapon. Consider this an exercise in field adaptation." Marcus's heart sank even further. The other students were now openly laughing. Creating a weapon from classroom furniture seemed like an impossible task, especially one that could compete with crystal blades and plasma hammers. But as he looked around the room, Marcus began to notice things others hadn't considered. The desks were made of a flexible polymer composite, designed to be lightweight yet durable. The chairs had metal frames with adjustable joints. There were elastic bands used for holding data pads, synthetic fabric from the cushions, and even some basic tools in the emergency repair kit mounted on the wall. An idea began to form in Marcus's mind. It was crazy, almost primitive by galactic standards. But it just might work. He had learned to make bows as a child during summer camps on Earth. His grandfather had been an archery enthusiast and had taught Marcus the basics of bow construction and arrow fletching. "I accept the challenge, Commander," Marcus said, his confidence slowly returning. "May I have permission to modify the available materials?" Vexthai gestured dismissively. "Do whatever you must, Cadet. The clock starts now." Marcus immediately went to work. He began by carefully examining the desks, looking for pieces that had the right combination of flexibility and strength. The desktop surfaces were too rigid, but the adjustable legs had a spring-loaded mechanism that gave them exactly the properties he needed. While his classmates watched with growing curiosity, Marcus began disassembling one of the desks. He removed 2 of the adjustable legs, each about 1 meter long, and started working on joining them together. The emergency kit provided him with a molecular bonding agent that would fuse the pieces permanently. "What is he doing?" one of the Zephyrians whispered to her companion. "I believe he's attempting to construct some form of projectile launcher," Silandra observed, her ethereal voice carrying a note of interest. Marcus ignored the commentary and continued working. He shaped the joined desk legs into a curved form, using the heating element from the emergency kit to make the material more pliable. The polymer was responding better than he had hoped, maintaining its strength while allowing him to create the recurved shape that would give his bow its power. Next, he needed a string. The elastic bands were too weak, but the cushions contained a synthetic fiber filling that could be woven together. Marcus began braiding the fibers into a strong cord, testing the tension repeatedly to make sure it would hold under pressure. 15 minutes remaining, Commander Vexthai announced. Marcus worked faster now, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. He had constructed emergency shelters and tools during survival training, and those skills were serving him well now. He carved notches in the ends of his bow to hold the string, then began working on arrows. The chair legs provided excellent arrow shafts once he removed the padding and straightened them. For fletching, he used strips of fabric from the cushions, carefully attaching them to provide stability in flight. The points were more challenging, but he managed to sharpen the metal tips of the chair legs using the abrasive surface of the emergency repair tool. 5 minutes, Vexthai called out. Marcus strung his bow and tested the draw. The polymer composite flexed beautifully, storing energy efficiently as he pulled back the improvised bowstring. He made a few final adjustments to the arrows, checking their balance and making sure the fletching was properly aligned. Time. Marcus stood up, holding his completed bow. It was roughly 1.5 meters long with a graceful, recurved shape that looked almost organic. The synthetic string gleamed under the classroom lights, and the 3 arrows he had crafted lay neatly beside him on the desk. The classroom was completely silent now. Even the students who had been laughing earlier were staring at his creation with undisguised curiosity. Commander Vexthai approached the demonstration area, his 4 eyes examining the bow from multiple angles. "Explain your weapon, Cadet Chen." Marcus picked up the bow, feeling its familiar weight in his hands. "This is a recurved bow, Commander. It's based on a design that humans have used for thousands of years. The curved tips store and release energy more efficiently than a simple straight design, increasing the velocity and range of projectiles." He knocked one of his improvised arrows and drew back the string. The bow flexed smoothly, the polymer composite storing a significant amount of energy. The projectiles are arrows, designed to fly straight and true over distance. The fletching provides stability, while the pointed tip concentrates the impact force into a small area. "Demonstrate," Vexthai ordered, activating a holographic target at the far end of the room. Marcus took a deep breath, drew back the arrow, and released. The arrow flew across the classroom in a flat arc, striking the holographic target dead center with a satisfying thunk as it embedded itself in the wall behind the projection. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Marcus quickly nocked and fired his second arrow, then his third. All 3 struck within a hand's width of each other, clustering around the target's center. "Impressive accuracy," Commander Vexthai admitted, his mandibles clicking rapidly. "But what is the tactical advantage of such a primitive projectile system? Surely it cannot compare to energy weapons in terms of stopping power or versatility?" Marcus lowered his bow and faced the instructor. "You're right, Commander. A single arrow cannot match the raw power of a plasma blast or crystal blade. But this weapon has other advantages that might not be immediately apparent." He gestured to the arrows embedded in the wall. "First, it's completely silent. There's no energy signature to detect, no muzzle flash to reveal position. Second, it requires no power source or ammunition supply chain. As long as you have basic materials, you can craft more arrows in the field." The instructor's 4 arms shifted position, a sign that Marcus had his attention. "Continue." "Third, it's immune to electromagnetic interference. Energy weapons can be disrupted by jamming or EMP attacks, but this bow will function in any environment. Fourth, it has an incredibly simple design with no complex parts to fail during extended operations." Marcus paused, then added the point he hoped would resonate most with the weapons master. "But perhaps most importantly, it's unexpected. Every military force in the galaxy is prepared to defend against energy weapons, plasma attacks, and exotic matter manipulation. How many have defense protocols specifically designed to counter projectile weapons moving at subsonic speeds? The silence in the room was different now. Instead of amusement or confusion, Marcus could sense his classmates were actually considering his words. Even Silandra looked thoughtful, her ethereal features showing the first hint of emotion Marcus had ever seen from her. Commander HFY walked over to the embedded arrows and examined them closely. The penetration depth is significant, he admitted. These projectiles passed completely through a standard holographic projector housing and embedded themselves several centimeters into the reinforced wall behind it. He turned back to Marcus. You've created a functional weapon system from classroom furniture in under an hour, demonstrated acceptable accuracy, and presented valid tactical arguments for its use. However, his voice took on the stern tone that meant a critique was coming. You have also revealed the fundamental limitation of your species' approach to warfare. Marcus felt his brief moment of pride beginning to deflate. Sir? You think small, Cadet Chen. Your weapon is clever, even ingenious in its simplicity, but it lacks the scope and power needed for modern warfare. A single arrow, no matter how well aimed, cannot stop a charging Mordak warrior or penetrate starship armor. The instructor's forearms spread wide in a gesture that encompassed the entire room. Your classmates have shown you weapons that can level buildings, cut through any material, or strike targets across impossible distances. Your bow, while admirably crafted, remains a tool for hunting small game or engaging individual opponents. Marcus felt the familiar weight of inadequacy settling on his shoulders again. He had thought, for just a moment, that he had proven something important about human ingenuity. Instead, he had apparently only demonstrated their limitations. However, HFY continued, there is value in understanding unconventional approaches to combat. Your weapon will remain here as an example to future classes of creative problem-solving under pressure. It was faint praise, but Marcus supposed it was better than complete failure. He began gathering up his remaining materials, preparing to return to his seat and endure whatever comments his classmates might have about the human's primitive demonstration. But as he bent down to collect the scraps of fabric and leftover chair parts, Marcus noticed something that made him pause. One of the arrows had passed completely through not just the holographic projector, but also the reinforced wall behind it. He could see a small hole where the point had actually emerged on the other side. The wall was rated to stop direct hits from military-grade plasma rifles. Marcus straightened up slowly, his mind racing. Maybe his bow was more capable than anyone realized, including himself. Maybe the problem wasn't that humans thought too small, but that everyone else had forgotten how to think differently. The bell chimed, signaling the end of class. Students began gathering their materials and filing out, chattering about the various demonstrations they had witnessed. Marcus was about to follow them when Commander HFY's voice stopped him. Cadet Chen, remain behind. Marcus's classmates shot him sympathetic glances as they left. Being asked to stay after class was rarely a good sign at the academy. He stood at attention beside his improvised bow, waiting for whatever additional critique the instructor had prepared. When the last student had left and the door sealed behind them, HFY approached Marcus with a different bearing than he had shown during class. His movements were more relaxed, and his mandibles had stopped their nervous clicking. Tell me honestly, cadet, the instructor said quietly. How common is this type of creative adaptation among humans? The question caught Marcus off guard. Sir? What you did today, HFY gestured toward the bow. Taking available materials and crafting a functional weapon system with no preparation or advanced tools. Is this a skill taught to all human military personnel? Or are you unusually gifted? Marcus considered the question carefully. It's fairly common, sir. Human children learn basic crafting and improvisation as part of standard education. Military training emphasizes field expedient solutions and adaptive problem solving. We call it Making do with what you have. Vexthai's four arms moved in what Marcus had learned was the Kithaeron equivalent of surprise. Fascinating. Most species in the Federation specialize early and deeply. A Zephyrian crystalsmith knows everything about crystal matrices, but very little about metallurgy. A Mordak forge master can work with plasma, but would struggle to create anything with organic materials. The instructor walked around Marcus's bow again, studying it from all angles. But humans appear to maintain broad, adaptable skill sets even as they advance in their specializations. This suggests your species has developed under very different evolutionary pressures than most Federation worlds. Marcus wasn't sure if he was supposed to respond to what sounded more like the instructor thinking out loud than a direct question. He remained at attention, waiting for guidance. "At ease, cadet," Vexthai said absently, still examining the arrows embedded in the wall. "I want you to prepare a detailed report on the construction and tactical applications of your improvised weapon system. Include theoretical modifications that could enhance its effectiveness in various combat scenarios." "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, though he wondered what kind of modifications could possibly make a bow competitive with plasma weapons and phase manipulators. "And cadet?" Vexthai's voice carried a note that Marcus couldn't quite identify. "Next week's class will focus on adaptation and improvisation in combat situations. I believe your perspective might prove educational for your classmates." As Marcus gathered his materials and prepared to leave, he caught sight of his reflection in the darkened window. He looked the same as always. A slightly overwhelmed human trying to keep up in a universe full of beings with capabilities he could barely comprehend. But something had changed during today's demonstration. For the first time since arriving at the academy, Marcus felt like maybe being human wasn't just a disadvantage to overcome. Maybe there were things his species could contribute that others had never considered. The bow lay on the demonstration table where he had left it, looking crude and primitive next to the sleek holographic displays of advanced alien weapons. But those three arrows embedded in the supposedly impenetrable wall told a different story. Marcus smiled slightly as he headed for the door. Tomorrow he would start researching ways to improve his design. If Commander Vexthai wanted to see what human adaptability could really accomplish, Marcus was determined not to disappoint him. The corridor outside was empty, most students having already moved on to their next classes or study sessions. Marcus walked slowly toward the library, his mind already working on the problems the instructor had posed. Theoretical modifications, tactical applications, enhanced effectiveness. The challenge was daunting but exciting. Behind him, unseen, Commander Vexthai continued to study the arrows in the wall, his four arms moving in patterns that indicated deep thought. The Kithaeron had fought in 17 major conflicts across the galaxy, and he had seen weapons that could crack planets and devices that could manipulate time itself. But he had never seen anyone create something functional and deadly from classroom furniture in less than an hour, and he was beginning to suspect that this simple demonstration might have implications far beyond what any of them realized. Marcus spent the entire night in the Academy's materials lab, his report forgotten as he became obsessed with improving his bow design. The lab was officially closed, but his student access card still worked, and the night security AI seemed content to let him tinker as long as he didn't trigger any safety alerts. The basic composite materials available to students were far superior to the desk legs he had used in class. Advanced carbon fiber weaves, memory polymers, and even some basic smart materials that could adjust their properties in response to electrical signals. Marcus felt like a child in a candy store as he explored the possibilities. His first improved bow was nearly twice as powerful as the classroom version. The smart polymer limbs could store and release energy more efficiently than anything humans had ever created on Earth. The draw weight was adjustable through neural interface, allowing the same weapon to fire anything from practice arrows to armor-piercing projectiles. But as he worked, Marcus began to realize that raw power wasn't the real advantage of his weapon system. Every military force in the galaxy had access to devastating energy weapons. What they didn't have was versatility and silence. He started experimenting with different arrow designs, basic points for soft targets, hardened tips for armor penetration, and even a few exotic concepts borrowed from other weapons classes. What if an arrow could carry a small explosive charge? What if it could deploy a micro-drone payload? What if the shaft itself could be made from programmable matter that reconfigured upon impact? By morning, Marcus had created something that barely resembled the simple bow from his demonstration. The weapon folded down to the size of a small tablet for concealment, deployed instantly when activated, and could fire a variety of specialized ammunition adapted for different mission requirements. He was admiring his work when the lab door chimed softly and Commander Vexithai entered. The Catharan instructor looked exactly the same as always, but Marcus was beginning to read the subtle signs of his moods. The rapid clicking of mandibles indicated excitement or intense interest. "Cadet Chen," Vexithai said without preamble, "you've been here all night." "Yes, sir. I got carried away working on my report." Marcus gestured toward his improved bow. "I started thinking about the modifications you mentioned, and one thing led to another." Vexithai approached the workbench, his forearms moving in complex patterns as he examined the new weapon. "Explain the improvements." For the next hour, Marcus demonstrated each innovation he had incorporated. The adjustable draw weight, the folding design, the various arrow types, and the neural interface controls. With each feature, Vexithai's mandibles clicked faster. "Impressive," the instructor finally said. "But I notice you focused primarily on enhancing the existing design rather than addressing its fundamental limitations. Your weapon is still relatively short-ranged compared to energy rifles, and the projectile velocity remains subsonic." Marcus nodded. "I considered trying to increase the velocity, but I realized that might actually be missing the point. This isn't meant to replace energy weapons. It's meant to provide capabilities they can't." He picked up one of his specialized arrows. For example, this one carries a micro-EMP generator. It's designed to disable electronic systems without causing permanent damage. An energy weapon would either destroy the target completely or have no effect at all. Vexithai examined the arrow closely. "And this one?" "Grappling hook with molecular wire cable. Silent insertion and extraction from structures. This one deploys a small surveillance drone on impact. This one releases a cloud of marker nanobots that allow tracking of targets even through phase shifts." The instructor's forearms were now moving in the rapid, complex patterns that Marcus had learned indicated extreme interest or excitement. "You've created a completely different category of weapon. Not just a projectile launcher, but a delivery system for specialized payloads." "Exactly, sir. And because it's mechanical rather than electronic, it's nearly impossible to detect or jam. The arrows themselves can be crafted from materials that don't show up on standard sensors." Vexithai was quiet for a long moment, studying both the weapon and Marcus himself. "Cadet, I want you to prepare for a special demonstration this afternoon. I'm inviting some colleagues to observe your presentation." Marcus felt a familiar knot of anxiety in his stomach. "What kind of colleagues, sir?" "The kind who decide what weapons systems get adopted by Federation forces," Vexithai replied, "and the kind who might be very interested in unconventional solutions to tactical problems." 3 hours later, Marcus stood in the Academy's main demonstration hall, facing an audience that made him more nervous than he had ever been in his life. Along with Commander Vexithai and his regular classmates, there were now a dozen senior officers representing different branches of Federation military and intelligence services. Admiral Thornash of the Fleet Defense Corps sat in the front row, her crystalline Zephyrian form reflecting the overhead lights in distracting patterns. Beside her, General Krovic of the Marine Assault Forces looked like he could crush Marcus's bow with one massive Mordak hand. The intelligence representatives were harder to identify, but Marcus spotted at least two ethereals, and something that might have been a Void Walker, though those were so rarely seen that he couldn't be sure. "Proceed with your demonstration, Cadet Chen," Admiral Thornash said in her musical voice. "Commander Vexisthai has made some interesting claims about your weapon system." Marcus took a deep breath and began with the basic design, explaining the principles of stored energy release and mechanical advantage. The senior officers listened politely, but without obvious interest. They had seen countless weapon demonstrations over the years. But when he began showing the specialized ammunition, the atmosphere in the room changed dramatically. The EMP arrow drew sharp attention from the intelligence representatives. The surveillance drone payload made General Krovic lean forward in his seat. The molecular wire grappling system caused quiet conversations to break out among several groups. "The key advantage," Marcus explained, "isn't raw power or advanced technology. It's adaptability and stealth. This system can be deployed in situations where energy weapons would be detected immediately or where conventional military equipment would be inappropriate." He picked up an arrow that looked identical to all the others. "For example, this appears to be a standard projectile, but the shaft contains a data storage core with quantum encryption. It could be used to transfer intelligence between agents in situations where any electronic communication would be intercepted." Admiral Thornash's crystalline form seemed to brighten. "Show us the deployment mechanism." Marcus knocked the data arrow and fired it across the demonstration hall. It struck a target with the same satisfying thunk as any other arrow, but when he activated a small control device, the shaft split open to reveal a data crystal that projected a brief holographic message. "The payload can be programmed to activate based on time delay, remote signal, or impact with a specific target signature," Marcus explained. "And if the arrow is intercepted, the shaft just looks like primitive wood and metal to any standard scanning system." The room had gone completely silent now. Even his regular classmates were staring at the demonstration with new understanding. What had seemed like a quaint, primitive weapon yesterday was revealing itself to be something far more sophisticated. General Krovic raised one massive hand. "What about armor penetration? My troops wear battle suits that can withstand direct hits from military plasma rifles." Marcus had anticipated this question. He selected an arrow with a different tip design, longer, narrower, and made from a material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "This is made from compressed neutronium composite," he said, causing several gasps from the audience. "It's incredibly expensive and difficult to work with, but the penetrating power is extraordinary." He fired the arrow at a test plate made from the same material used in starship armor. The projectile punched through like the armor was paper, continued through the reinforced wall behind it, and likely embedded itself somewhere in the Academy's foundational structure. "Of course, that's massive overkill for most applications," Marcus continued quickly, seeing the shocked expressions around the room. "But it demonstrates that the system can be scaled up to handle any level of protection." Admiral Thornash stood up, her crystal form chiming softly. "Cadet Chen, are you telling us that this weapon system can penetrate advanced armor, deliver specialized payloads, operate in complete electronic silence, and be manufactured from readily available materials?" "Yes, ma'am. And it can be learned and operated by any species with basic hand-eye coordination. No special training in energy manipulation or exotic matter physics required." The Admiral turned to Commander Vexthai. "This demonstration raises some very interesting possibilities. I assume you have a full technical analysis prepared?" "Actually, ma'am," Vexthai replied, his mandibles clicking rapidly. "We've discovered something even more significant than the weapon itself." All eyes turned back to the instructor. Marcus felt a growing sense of unease as he realized the demonstration was moving in directions he hadn't anticipated. Cadet Chen created his first functional version of this weapon from classroom furniture in under an hour, Vextai continued. Yesterday, with access to advanced materials, he developed these specialized applications overnight. But what's most remarkable is that this represents typical human problem-solving methodology. General Krovik's stone features shifted into what might have been a frown. Explain. Humans appear to have evolved under conditions that favored broad adaptability over deep specialization. Most Federation species excel in specific areas but struggle with interdisciplinary innovation. Humans naturally combine concepts from different fields to create novel solutions. The intelligence representatives were now engaged in rapid, quiet discussions. Marcus caught fragments of conversations about operational flexibility and adaptive deployment capabilities. Admiral Thornash raised her hand for silence. Are you suggesting that this isn't just an interesting weapon design, but an example of a fundamentally different approach to problem-solving? Precisely, ma'am, Vextai confirmed. And if that's correct, it has implications far beyond weapons development. Marcus was beginning to feel like he had stumbled into something much larger than a simple class demonstration. The senior officers were looking at him not with the casual interest they might show a promising cadet, but with the intense focus usually reserved for strategic assets. "Cadet Chen," Admiral Thornash said, turning her full attention to him. "How common are these adaptive problem-solving skills among your species?" Marcus thought about how to answer honestly without overselling human capabilities. "They're expected, ma'am. Human education emphasizes learning to learn rather than memorizing specific techniques. Military training focuses heavily on improvisation and adaptation to unexpected situations. Can you give us an example of this from your own experience?" Marcus's mind raced through various possibilities. "Well, during survival training at the academy, I was dropped in a hostile environment with minimal equipment and told to survive for a week. The environment was designed for ethereal physiology, so none of the standard human survival techniques applied." He paused, remembering the challenge. "I ended up creating a water reclamation system using components from my emergency beacon, building shelter from crystallized atmospheric gases that I learned to harvest and shape, and developing a food production method based on cultivating local microorganisms in improvised nutrient solutions." The room was quiet again, but this time the silence felt different, more thoughtful and somehow more intense. General Krovik leaned back in his seat, causing it to creak ominously. "And this kind of adaptation is routine in human training?" "It's considered essential, sir. Humans have a saying, 'No plan survives first contact with the enemy.' We're taught to expect that our initial approach to any problem will need to be modified or completely changed as conditions evolve." One of the ethereal intelligence officers spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the strange harmonic undertones of her species. "This suggests significant potential for unconventional warfare applications. Opponents who prepare for standard human military doctrine might be unprepared for novel tactical approaches." Marcus felt like the conversation was moving away from weapons demonstration toward something that resembled strategic planning. He wasn't sure if that was good or bad, but he was definitely out of his depth. Admiral Thornash seemed to reach some kind of decision. "Cadet Chen, you'll be transferred to advanced weapons development immediately. Your new assignment is to explore unconventional applications of human problem-solving methodologies to military challenges." What?" Marcus stammered. "Ma'am, I'm just a first-year student. I don't know anything about weapons development beyond what I've shown you today." "Exactly," the Admiral replied with something that might have been a smile. "That's precisely why you're qualified for this assignment." Commander Vexthai's mandibles were clicking so rapidly now that it sounded almost like purring. Cadet, you've just been recruited for one of the most classified research programs in Federation military history. Marcus looked around the room at the assembled senior officers, all of whom were now studying him with expressions ranging from intense interest to what might have been calculation. His simple bow demonstration had somehow escalated into a major strategic discussion about human capabilities and unconventional warfare. "What exactly would this assignment involve, ma'am?" he asked carefully. Admiral Thornash gestured to one of the intelligence officers, who activated a holographic display showing what appeared to be a galactic map with various sectors highlighted in different colors. "The Federation is facing new challenges from hostile forces that have proven resistant to conventional military responses," she explained. "These adversaries have studied our standard tactics and developed specific countermeasures for our typical weapon systems and strategic approaches." She pointed to several red zones on the map. "We need fresh perspectives on how to engage enemies who have prepared specifically for traditional Federation military doctrine. Your species' apparent talent for novel approaches to established problems could provide the edge we need." Marcus stared at the map, trying to process what he was hearing. "You want me to develop new ways to fight wars?" "We want you to think about old problems in new ways," General Krovic corrected. "The weapons and tactics will be developed by specialists, but the creative approaches, the unexpected angles, the solutions that no one else would consider, that's where human adaptability becomes strategically valuable." The ethereal intelligence officer added, "Your bow is ingenious, but it's also a perfect example of what we're looking for. You took ancient human technology, combined it with advanced materials and novel payload concepts, and created something that doesn't exist in any military database. An enemy analyzing Federation capabilities would never predict that weapon system." Marcus felt both excited and terrified by the implications. "How many other humans are involved in this program?" "Currently," Admiral Thornash checked her datapad, "3. You would be the 4th. Only 4 humans in the entire Federation military are working on this?" "Only 4 humans in the entire Federation military have been identified as suitable for this work," she corrected. "The psychological profiles required are quite specific." Commander Vexthai stepped forward. "Cadet Chen, you should understand that accepting this assignment would mean leaving traditional academy training. You'd be working directly with senior researchers on classified projects. The work would be challenging, potentially dangerous, and absolutely critical to Federation security." Marcus looked around the room one more time, taking in the expectant faces of some of the most powerful military leaders in the galaxy. Yesterday, he had been a struggling first-year cadet worried about keeping up with his more advanced classmates. Today, he was being recruited for strategic warfare development because he had made a bow out of classroom furniture. The irony wasn't lost on him. "I accept the assignment, ma'am," Marcus said finally. "When do I start?" Admiral Thornash's crystalline form chimed with what sounded like satisfaction. "Immediately. Your first briefing begins in 2 hours. Commander Vexithai will escort you to the secure research facility." As the senior officers began filing out of the demonstration hall, Marcus caught fragments of their conversations. Words like operational deployment, psychological warfare potential, and asymmetric advantage drifted back to him. He was beginning to understand that his simple weapon demonstration had touched on something much larger than anyone had initially realized. General Krovic paused beside Marcus before leaving. "Cadet, a word of advice from an old soldier. What you've shown us today could change how wars are fought across the galaxy. That's an enormous responsibility. Don't let it overwhelm you, but don't take it lightly either." The massive Mordak placed one stone-heavy hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Your species has gifts that others don't. Use them wisely." After the general left, Marcus found himself alone with Commander Vexthai and his regular classmates, who had watched the entire exchange in stunned silence. Lyra-san, The Zephyrian, who had demonstrated her crystal blade the day before, approached hesitantly. "Marcus, what just happened here?" "I think," Marcus said slowly, "I just got promoted way above my competence level because I'm good at making things up as I go along." Silandra, the ethereal who could fold space, tilted her head thoughtfully. "That's not entirely accurate. What you demonstrated wasn't just improvisation. It was systematic innovation. You identified limitations in existing approaches and developed novel solutions that address those limitations." Commander Vexthai's mandibles clicked approvingly. Silandra is correct. What makes human problem-solving remarkable isn't just creativity. It's the ability to combine disparate concepts into functional solutions quickly and efficiently. Gorath, the Mordak student, hefted his plasma hammer thoughtfully. "My people spend centuries perfecting single-weapon designs. You created something entirely new in a few hours. I'm beginning to understand why the Admiral was so interested." Marcus looked at his classmates, beings whose civilizations had mastered technologies he could barely comprehend, and realized that they were looking at him with something approaching respect. Not for his technical knowledge or his access to advanced resources, but for his ability to think differently about problems. "Commander," Marcus said, "what exactly is this research program I'm being assigned to?" Vexthai's four arms moved in complex patterns as he considered how to answer. "The official designation is Adaptive Strategic Development Initiative. Unofficially, it's called the Human Factor Project." "Human Factor?" "The Federation military has been essentially unchanged for over 1,000 years, Cadet. We've improved our technologies, refined our tactics, and expanded our capabilities, but the fundamental approaches to warfare have remained constant. Energy weapons, kinetic bombardment, phase manipulation, gravity distortion. The same basic categories of force applied in increasingly sophisticated ways." Vexithai gestured toward the bow still lying on the demonstration table. "But your species approaches problems from completely different angles. You see possibilities that others miss because you don't assume that the current solutions are optimal." Marcus was beginning to understand the scope of what he was walking into. "So this program is about developing new military strategies based on human problem-solving methods?" "Partly, but it's also about understanding what makes human cognition different from other Federation species, and whether those differences can be taught or replicated." Silandra spoke up again. "If human adaptability can be systematized and distributed throughout Federation forces, it would represent a significant strategic advantage. And if it can't be replicated," Gorath added grimly, "then humans become irreplaceable strategic assets." The implications of that statement hit Marcus like a physical blow. If his species' problem-solving abilities were truly unique and valuable, what would that mean for humanity's position in the Federation? Would humans become partners or tools? Commander Vexthai seemed to read his thoughts. "Cadet, the research program isn't designed to exploit human capabilities. It's designed to understand and enhance them. The Federation benefits most when all member species can contribute their unique strengths to common challenges." Marcus nodded, though he wasn't entirely convinced. Politics at the galactic level were far beyond his understanding, but he was smart enough to recognize that being uniquely valuable could be both an advantage and a vulnerability. 2 hours until my briefing," he said, looking at his improved bow. "What should I expect?" "Technical analysis, threat assessment, and your first assignment," Vexthai replied. "I suspect they'll want you to apply your methodology to current strategic challenges to see what novel approaches you might develop." Marcus picked up his bow, feeling its familiar weight in his hands. 24 hours ago, it had been a desperate improvisation born from embarrassment and the need to avoid complete failure in class. Now it was apparently an example of strategically significant human cognitive capabilities. He wasn't sure whether to be proud or terrified. "Commander, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Cadet." When you assigned that demonstration yesterday, did you expect anything like this to happen? Vexathai's mandibles clicked in what Marcus had learned was amusement. Honestly? I expected you to create something crude but functional, demonstrate basic competence, and learn a valuable lesson about preparation and resource management. The instructor's four arms moved in a gesture that might have been the equivalent of a shrug. What I didn't expect was for you to reveal a fundamental difference in how your species approaches technical challenges. That was unprecedented. Marcus looked around the demonstration hall one last time before heading to his briefing. His classmates were packing up their advanced weapons: crystal blades, plasma hammers, phase manipulators, and devices he couldn't even identify. Each represented thousands of years of technological development and cultural refinement. His bow represented afternoons spent improvising with furniture scraps and a night playing with ideas in the materials lab. But somehow, his primitive approach had impressed some of the most advanced military minds in the galaxy. As he walked toward the exit, Marcus realized that everything he thought he knew about human capabilities and galactic politics was about to change. He was no longer just a struggling cadet trying to keep up with more advanced species. He was about to become a strategic asset in conflicts he didn't yet understand, developing solutions to problems he couldn't yet imagine. The bow in his hands felt heavier now, weighted not just with polymer composite and mechanical tension, but with the responsibility of representing his entire species' approach to innovation and problem-solving. Marcus took a deep breath and headed toward his new assignment, wondering if human adaptability would be enough to handle whatever challenges lay ahead. Behind him, Commander Vexathai watched thoughtfully as the first human strategic weapons developer in Federation history walked toward a future that nobody could predict. The instructor's mandibles clicked slowly as he considered the implications of what they had just witnessed. In his 2 centuries of teaching weapons engineering, he had seen thousands of demonstrations of advanced technology and exotic physics applications. But he had never seen anyone create a strategic paradigm shift with classroom furniture and an afternoon's work. As he began collecting the data from the demonstration for his reports to Federation Command, Vexathai found himself wondering whether they had just witnessed the beginning of a new era in galactic warfare or simply discovered something that humans had always been capable of, but no one had bothered to notice. Either way, he suspected the galaxy was about to become a much more interesting place. The secure research facility was unlike anything Marcus had seen during his time at the Academy. Located deep beneath the main campus, the corridors were lined with energy dampeners and sensor scramblers that made his skin tingle with residual static. Armed guards from multiple species stood at regular intervals, their weapons representing the pinnacle of Federation military technology. Commander Vexathai led him through a series of security checkpoints, each more sophisticated than the last. Biometric scanners, neural pattern analyzers, and what appeared to be some kind of quantum signature detector all confirmed his identity before allowing passage to the next level. Impressive security, Marcus observed as they waited for a final clearance at a massive armored door. The work conducted here represents some of the Federation's most classified military research, Vexathai replied. Technologies developed in these labs often determine the outcome of entire conflicts. The armored door dilated open with a soft hiss, revealing a vast complex of laboratories, testing chambers, and research facilities. Scientists from dozens of species worked at stations displaying holographic models of weapons, starships, and tactical scenarios Marcus couldn't begin to understand. But what caught his attention immediately were the 3 humans scattered throughout the complex. The first was a woman in her 30s with close-cropped dark hair and the kind of intense focus that suggested she was accustomed to solving impossible problems. She was working with a team of Zephyrian engineers on what appeared to be a completely new type of energy distribution system. The second was an older man with graying temples who was engaged in animated discussion with several ethereal physicists around a holographic display showing what looked like star system defensive positions. His gestures were expansive and confident, suggesting someone comfortable with high-level strategic planning. The third was younger than Marcus, probably fresh out of undergraduate studies on Earth. She was sitting alone at a workstation surrounded by components that didn't seem to belong to any recognizable technology, assembling something with the methodical precision of an experienced tinker. "Your colleagues," Vexthai said, following Marcus's gaze. "Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation, despite the name, specializes in unconventional power systems. Colonel James Harrison handles strategic deployment scenarios, and Lieutenant Maya Patel focuses on equipment modification and field expedient solutions." Marcus watched Dr. Chen explain something to the Zephyrian engineers, her hands moving in quick, precise gestures as she outlined what appeared to be a completely new approach to energy storage. The engineers' crystalline forms were shifting through rapid color changes that indicated extreme interest or excitement. "What exactly has she developed?" Marcus asked. "A method for storing antimatter in ordinary matter matrices using controlled dimensional folding," Vexthai replied casually, as if this wasn't one of the most significant breakthroughs in physics Marcus had ever heard of. "The applications for portable high-energy systems are extensive." Marcus stared at Dr. Chen with new respect. "And Colonel Harrison? He's the one who developed the tactical doctrine that ended the Voidwalker insurgency in the Outer Rim. Instead of trying to match their stealth capabilities, he created strategies that turned their own advantages against them." The older man was now pointing at different sections of the holographic star map, explaining something that was causing the ethereal observers to create what looked like excited harmonics in their communications. "And Lieutenant Patel? Equipment modification specialist. She can take any piece of technology and adapt it for purposes its designers never imagined. Last month, she converted a cargo transport into a siege weapon using nothing but spare parts and standard maintenance equipment." Marcus watched the young woman work, noting the organized chaos of her workspace and the confident way she handled components that probably cost more than most starships. "How long have they been here?" "Dr. Chen, 18 months. Colonel Harrison, 2 years. Lieutenant Patel arrived 6 months ago." Vexthai's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "You're the 4th addition to the program, and potentially the most significant. Why is that?" "Because you're the first one recruited based on pure problem-solving demonstration rather than previous achievements. The others were already established specialists in their fields. You represent the possibility that these capabilities can be identified and developed early rather than waiting for them to emerge naturally." They approached a central briefing area where Admiral Thornash was waiting along with several other senior officers Marcus didn't recognize. The Admiral's crystalline form caught the ambient lighting and scattered it in complex patterns that suggested she was in a highly focused state. "Cadet Chen," she said without preamble, "welcome to the Adaptive Strategic Development Initiative. Please take a seat." Marcus settled into a chair that automatically adjusted to his physiology, while holographic displays materialized around the briefing area. The first showed what appeared to be a galactic map, with several sectors highlighted in ominous red. "Your first assignment," Admiral Thornash continued, "involves a significant tactical challenge that conventional approaches have failed to resolve." The display zoomed in on one of the red sectors, revealing a cluster of star systems under some kind of siege. Marcus could see Federation fleet positions marked in blue, but they appeared to be maintaining a significant distance from the affected systems. "The hegemony has developed a new form of warfare," the Admiral explained. "Instead of direct military confrontation, they deploy what we call conversion zones, areas of space where matter itself becomes unstable and hostile to most known technology." Marcus studied the tactical display, noting the way Federation forces were positioned. Our ships can't enter these zones? Correct. Any vessel using standard Federation technology experiences catastrophic system failures within minutes of entering a conversion zone. The matter comprising the ship's hull begins to restructure itself according to hegemony specifications. A new display showed recordings of Federation ships attempting to enter the affected areas. Marcus watched in horrified fascination as sleek starships began to twist and change, their hull plating shifting into organic-looking growths before the vessels lost all structural integrity. The hegemony uses this technique to isolate star systems, then moves in with specialized ships designed to operate in converted space. Once they've established control, they begin converting the entire system, planets, populations, everything. Marcus felt a cold certainty settling in his stomach. And you want me to figure out how to operate in these zones? We want you to approach this problem without the assumptions that have limited our other strategic responses, Admiral Thornash corrected. Every conventional solution has focused on developing technology that can resist the conversion effect, but perhaps the answer lies in a completely different approach. Marcus stood up and walked closer to the tactical display, studying the positioning of ships and the boundaries of the conversion zones. How long have you been trying conventional solutions? 18 months. We've lost over 300 ships in failed attempts to penetrate these zones. And the conversion effect works on any technology based on Federation design principles? Correct. The hegemony appears to have developed a fundamental understanding of how our technologies operate, allowing them to subvert those systems at the molecular level. Marcus continued studying the display, his mind beginning to work on the problem from multiple angles. What about primitive technology, pre-Federation designs? One of the other officers, a Mordak general Marcus didn't recognize, spoke up. Primitive technology lacks the capability to mount any meaningful military response, even if it could survive in the conversion zones. But it could survive? Admiral Thornash's form brightened slightly. In theory, yes. The conversion effect appears to target sophisticated technological systems. Simple mechanical devices might remain unaffected. Marcus thought about his bow, lying in his quarters back at the academy. A weapon system that operated purely through stored mechanical energy, with no electronic components or exotic physics. It would be completely immune to any form of technological subversion. But one bow, no matter how well designed, couldn't take on an interstellar empire. What if we're approaching this backwards? Marcus said suddenly. Instead of trying to build technology that can resist conversion, what if we embraced it? The room fell silent. Admiral Thornash leaned forward, her crystalline structure resonating with harmonic frequencies that indicated intense interest. Explain. Marcus began pacing, his hands moving as his thoughts took shape. The hegemony converts our technology to work according to their principles, right? But conversion is a two-way process. What if we could figure out how to convert their technology to work according to our principles? Impossible, the Mordak general stated flatly. The conversion process is controlled by hegemony systems. We have no access to the underlying mechanisms. Maybe we don't need access to their mechanisms, Marcus replied, his excitement growing. Maybe we need to create our own. He turned back to the tactical display, pointing at the boundaries between normal space and the conversion zones. Look at these boundary regions. The conversion effect has a defined edge, which means it operates according to specific parameters. If we can understand those parameters, we might be able to create our own conversion fields. Admiral Thornash stood up, her form now cycling through rapid color changes. You're suggesting we develop the ability to convert hegemony technology to Federation specifications. I'm suggesting we stop thinking about this as a defensive problem and start thinking about it as an opportunity for technological acquisition, Marcus said. What if instead of losing ships to conversion, we could gain ships that operate on completely new principles? The room erupted in discussion as officers began considering the implications of Marcus's suggestion. But Admiral Thornash raised her hand for silence. "Cadet Chen, you've been here for less than an hour, and you've already proposed a completely new strategic approach to our most pressing military challenge. This is exactly what we hope to achieve with this program." Marcus felt both proud and slightly overwhelmed. "I should point out, ma'am, that I have absolutely no idea how to actually implement this approach. I'm just looking at the problem from a different angle." "That's precisely what we need," Admiral Thornash replied. "Implementation is what specialists are for. Innovation is what humans are for." She gestured toward Dr. Chen, who had finished her discussion with the Zephyrian engineers and was approaching the briefing area. "Sarah, we have a new theoretical framework for the hegemony problem. I want you to analyze the feasibility of controlled matter conversion." Dr. Chen listened as Admiral Thornash explained Marcus's suggestion, her expression growing more thoughtful with each detail. "Controlled bidirectional matter conversion," she said finally. "It's theoretically possible, but we'd need to understand the quantum mechanics underlying the hegemony's process." "How would we gain that understanding?" Marcus asked. "We'd need samples of converted matter to analyze," Dr. Chen replied. "And we'd need them in controlled laboratory conditions, not retrieved from a combat zone." Colonel Harrison joined the discussion, his strategic experience evident in the way he immediately began considering operational implications. Getting samples would require penetrating a conversion zone with equipment sophisticated enough to gather detailed data, but primitive enough to avoid being converted itself. "Like a bow," Marcus said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. "Explain," Admiral Thornash said. Marcus's mind was racing now, connecting concepts at a speed that surprised even him. A mechanical projectile system could deliver scientific instruments into a conversion zone without being affected by the conversion process. The payload could gather data and transmit it back using primitive radio signals that would be too simple to trigger conversion. Lieutenant Patel, who had been quiet until now, suddenly spoke up. "I could build that. A projectile-deployed sensor package using pre-electronic technology for all critical systems. Mechanical timers, chemical power sources, basic electromagnetic transmission." Dr. Chen nodded slowly. "If we could get detailed quantum signatures from active conversion zones, we might be able to reverse engineer the process." Colonel Harrison was already thinking ahead to operational deployment. "And if we can reverse engineer it, we can develop countermeasures, or better yet, our own conversion capabilities." Admiral Thornash's crystalline form was now cycling through colors so rapidly it was creating a strobe effect. "Cadet Chen, in one afternoon you've proposed a research path that could fundamentally change the balance of power in our conflict with the hegemony." Marcus looked around at the assembled officers and researchers, all of whom were now engaged in rapid discussions about implementation details and resource requirements. His simple suggestion had triggered a cascade of ideas and possibilities that were already evolving beyond his ability to follow. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I want to make sure everyone understands that I just pointed out a different way to look at the problem. I don't have the technical knowledge to actually solve it. But you have the cognitive approach that makes solution possible," Admiral Thornash replied. "That's the human factor we've been trying to understand and replicate." Dr. Chen looked up from her discussion with Lieutenant Patel. "Admiral, with Marcus's projectile delivery concept and my conversion research, we could have a working prototype in 6 weeks. And I can have deployment strategies ready for testing within the same time frame," Colonel Harrison added. Admiral Thornash turned back to Marcus. "Congratulations, Cadet Chen. You've just initiated what may become the most significant military development program in Federation history." Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders again, even heavier than before. "What happens if this doesn't work?" Then we'll try the next approach you suggest, Admiral Thornash said simply. That's what this program is for, generating new possibilities when conventional approaches fail. As the briefing began to break up, with various teams forming to work on different aspects of the new research direction, Marcus found himself standing next to Lieutenant Patel as she gathered her equipment. Maya, he said, using her first name since they would apparently be working closely together. Can I ask you something? Sure, she replied, not looking up from her collection of mysterious components. Do you ever feel like we're in over our heads here? Like we're just making educated guesses about problems that are way beyond our understanding? Maya stopped packing and looked at him directly for the first time. Every day, she said with a slight smile. But here's what I've learned. Sometimes being in over your head is exactly where you need to be to see solutions that experts miss. She gestured around the laboratory complex. Everyone else here knows too much about how things are supposed to work. They have trouble imagining how things could work differently. We don't have that limitation. Because we don't know enough to be limited by conventional thinking? Exactly. It's like your bow. Anyone with advanced weapons training would have dismissed the idea immediately, but you didn't know enough to know it wouldn't work, so you built it anyway. Marcus considered this as they walked toward the equipment labs, where Lieutenant Patel would begin work on the projectile sensor system. Is that really a sustainable approach to problem solving? Being deliberately ignorant? Not ignorant, Maya corrected. Unbiased. There's a difference between not knowing something and not assuming something. She paused at the entrance to her lab. The key is learning just enough to understand what you're trying to accomplish, but not so much that you accept limitations that might not actually exist. Marcus nodded, beginning to understand both the value and the danger of his position in this program. He was valuable precisely because he didn't know what was impossible. But that same ignorance could lead him to suggest approaches that were not just unconventional, but actively harmful. Maya, he said, how do you tell the difference between innovative thinking and dangerous stupidity? She grinned. You build prototypes and test them very carefully. Then you let experts tell you all the reasons your idea shouldn't work. Then you figure out how to make it work anyway. As Marcus headed toward his new quarters in the research facility, he reflected on the day's events. Less than 24 hours ago, he had been a struggling cadet, worried about failing a simple class demonstration. Now, he was part of a classified program developing strategies that could determine the fate of entire star systems. The transformation was so rapid and dramatic that he was having trouble believing it was real. But the weight of the security badge in his pocket and the complexity of the problems he was expected to help solve were definitely real. His bow had started as a desperate improvisation born from embarrassment. It had become a demonstration of human adaptability. Now it was potentially the foundation for a new class of military technology that could change the balance of galactic warfare. Marcus wasn't sure if that represented the power of human innovation or just an elaborate series of accidents that had gotten completely out of control. But as he settled into his new quarters and began reading the classified briefings that would educate him about the scope of the conflicts he was now part of, Marcus realized that the distinction might not matter. What mattered was whether the unconventional approaches he could generate would be enough to solve problems that conventional wisdom had declared unsolvable. The human factor, Admiral Thornash had called it. The ability to see possibilities that others missed, to combine disparate concepts into novel solutions, to approach problems without the limiting assumptions that came from deep expertise. Marcus looked at his bow, now resting against the wall of his new quarters. A primitive weapon crafted from classroom furniture, it had somehow become a symbol of humanity's contribution to galactic civilization. He hoped it would be enough.